The mystery behind Audie Murphy's death has finally been unraveled, and the truth is far from comforting. On May 28, 1971, a small private plane vanished into the fog-drenched mountains of Virginia. When it went down, America lost its most celebrated war hero turned Hollywood star, a man who had once single-handedly held off an entire company of German soldiers, killed 240 enemy combatants, and earned every combat medal his country could award. Audie Murphy, the baby-faced Texan who symbolized courage itself, was dead at only 45 years old. For 50 years, the official story labeled it a tragic accident caused by bad weather and poor visibility, just another small plane crash in the unforgiving Appalachian terrain. What if that story was deliberately fabricated? But now, newly uncovered evidence casts a dark shadow over the accepted narrative. The man who survived 27 months of brutal warfare might have been silenced by the very government he defended. No longer does the question concern how Audie Murphy died, but why. Rumors and whispers were heard over these many decades since that foggy morning, but they were quickly dismissed as conspiracy theories. Now, with once classified documents surfacing and long silent witnesses finally talking, a disturbing picture forms, one that shatters everything the public thought they knew about America's most decorated soldier and the country he served with devotion. As former military intelligence officer Colonel James Stevenson summarized so succinctly, what happened to Audie Murphy wasn't just a tragedy, it was a betrayal of everything he represented. To understand the magnitude of that betrayal, we must first understand the man himself, an orphan who rose from unthinkable poverty to become a living legend. Audie Leon Murphy was born in 1925 to sharecroppers in Hunt County, Texas, the seventh of 12 children. His early years were defined by hunger and hardship. When his father abandoned the family, young Audie became its provider. At 16, after his mother's death in 1941, he was left to care for his younger siblings alone. He never really had a childhood, biographer Robert Williams once explained. From a young age, Murphy faced adult burdens, hunting for food at 8 years old, picking cotton by 10 to keep his family alive. Where deprivation might have broken another soul, it hardened his resolve and built a resilience that would one day carry him through the fires of war. Murphy left school in the 5th grade but became a self-taught marksman by necessity, hunting game to fill empty stomachs. He learned to survive on little sleep and to suppress fear and exhaustion for the sake of those who depended on him. Everything that made Murphy an extraordinary soldier, Williams noted, was forged long before the Army trained him. The endurance, the discipline, the refusal to quit. Those survival instincts became his foundation when the world changed forever after Pearl Harbor. This undersized teenager tried to join the Marines, Navy, and paratroopers, who all rejected him as too small. 5'5", 112 pounds. Determined to serve, he falsified his age and finally joined the Army Infantry in 1942, just after his 17th birthday. What was about to happen defied the imagination of anyone who knew him. This quiet Texas farm boy would become the most decorated combat soldier in World War II. Over the course of 9 major campaigns, Murphy fought with fearless precision and unrelenting tenacity. He rose from private to second lieutenant, killing more than 240 enemy soldiers, surviving multiple wounds, and earning 33 medals, including every U.S. combat decoration then available, as well as 5 from France and Belgium. His record reads like fiction, said military historian Martin Dugard. In Sicily, he destroyed an Italian cavalry unit using captured German guns. In France, he single-handedly captured a machine gun nest and turned it against enemy forces. Near Ramatuelle, he crawled through open terrain to direct artillery fire on advancing troops, remaining exposed for over an hour. What separated Murphy from other heroes wasn't only courage, explained combat veteran Frank Morgan. It was his almost supernatural calm under fire. Officers recalled how, when chaos erupted, Murphy became sharper and more controlled, his mind slowing down as others panicked. That composure culminated on January 26, 1945, near Holtzwihr, France. With his company reduced to 19 men from the original 128, Murphy faced an overwhelming German assault. Wounded yet defiant, he climbed onto a burning tank destroyer, manned its machine gun, and held off the enemy single-handedly before leading a counterattack on foot. For this act, he received the Medal of Honor at just 19. It was like standing on a box of dynamite, he later said, downplaying the feat. I was scared, and I was fighting. That's all. By war's end, Audie Murphy had become a national icon. Life magazine placed his boyish face on its cover, branding him the embodiment of American heroism. But though he survived the battlefields of Europe, the peace he returned to would prove far more treacherous. Investigative journalist Michael Thorne would later claim that the country that celebrated Murphy in 1945 would quietly betray him by 1971. To understand why, one must trace the arc of his life from the glamour of Hollywood to the dark corridors of political secrecy. When Audie Murphy came home from the war, America treated him like a returning myth. Parades followed him through the streets of Texas, and Hollywood soon came calling. He was handsome, soft-spoken, and carried the mystique of a real-life hero. But Murphy was uneasy with fame from the start. James Cagney, who first spotted his potential, brought him to Los Angeles and offered to mentor him. Murphy had never acted before, but Cagney saw something rare: authenticity. "This kid doesn't need to act," Cagney reportedly told a producer. "He's lived it." After a few small parts, Murphy's big break came in 1955 when he played himself in To Hell and Back, the film adaptation of his own wartime memoir. The movie became a massive hit, Universal's highest-grossing film for 20 years. Audiences saw him relive the nightmare of battle on screen, yet few realized how painful it was for him. "He didn't have to pretend," said actress Pamela Archer, who worked with him later. "Every gunshot, every explosion, he felt it again." Off camera, Murphy struggled with nightmares, insomnia, and sudden bursts of rage. Today we would call it PTSD, but in the 1950s, no one had a name for it. Often, Murphy slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow. Friends said he would dive to the floor at the sound of thunder or fireworks. He was still in the war, his brother Eugene once said. His body came home, but part of him stayed over there. The Army had taught him to survive carnage, not to live in peace. Hollywood studios loved his courage, but ignored his wounds. They cast him as cowboys, lawmen, and quiet heroes in more than 40 films, but behind the camera, he wrestled with invisible battles. In 1949, he married the actress Wanda Hendricks, whose beauty and gentle nature were in sharp contrast to the turmoil that roiled within him. The marriage lasted only 2 years. Hendricks later described a man haunted by demons he couldn't name. "He would wake up screaming," she said. "I never felt safe because he was never really here." After their divorce, Murphy married Pamela Archer, a former airline stewardess, with whom he had 2 sons, Terry and James. She remained loyal even as his moods grew darker. "Pam saved him more times than anyone knows," said the director Don Siegel. Without her, he wouldn't have lasted as long as he did. But Murphy's problems went beyond trauma. He gambled recklessly, often losing his film salaries at racetracks or poker tables. He made and lost fortunes repeatedly. To cover debts, he borrowed from friends, signed questionable contracts, and even mortgaged his medals. "He had no sense of money," said fellow actor Dan Duryea. "He thought tomorrow would fix everything." Behind the charm lay a man exhausted by his own legend, trapped between gratitude and guilt. He had survived while so many others had not. He never thought he deserved the medals, Pamela once confessed. He thought he'd just been lucky. By the early 1960s, the Hollywood offers began to fade. The war hero image no longer sold tickets, and younger stars were taking over. Murphy tried to reinvent himself as a producer and songwriter, writing several country songs recorded by such artists as Dean Martin and Charlie Pride. But he couldn't escape the feeling that the system he had fought for was discarding him. "He was too honest for Hollywood," said screenwriter Harry Essex. "He wouldn't play the politics, and he didn't kiss up to anyone." Murphy's patriotism, however, never waned. During the 1960s, he became increasingly outspoken about corruption in the defense industry and what he believed was the government's mishandling of veterans' issues. He testified before Congress about the neglect of wounded soldiers and the lack of psychiatric support. His words were sharp and unfiltered. "We send boys to die and then forget them," he said. "That's not America." Those comments, once admired, soon made him enemies in high places. Former aide Charles Browning later hinted that Murphy's outspokenness attracted unwanted attention from military contractors and intelligence circles. Audie was poking around things he shouldn't have, Browning claimed in a 1980 interview. Murphy also invested in oil exploration and technology ventures loosely related to government contracts. One such venture was said to deal with experimental aircraft navigation systems, a fact that would later feed the many speculations surrounding his death. According to engineer Jack Goldman, Murphy had started raising questions about what kind of research projects were being worked on. He thought the company was being used as a front, Goldman said. He said if he found proof, he'd go public. Whether those fears were justified or not, they added a layer of tension to his final years. In 1968, after a car accident left him with temporary painkiller addiction, Murphy's world narrowed further. Friends watched him retreat from Hollywood social life. He became restless, traveling frequently and keeping notes on people he suspected of defrauding veterans programs. He spoke to investigative journalists and hinted he had documents proving misuse of funds by defense contractors. "He told me he had a story that would blow the lid off Washington," said journalist Frank Michelson. 2 weeks later, he stopped returning my calls. By 1971, Murphy was financially strained, emotionally fragile, and, according to those close to him, on the verge of something explosive. He was reportedly preparing to meet with officials and reporters to discuss his findings. That meeting never happened. On May 28, 1971, he boarded a private twin-engine Aero Commander 680 piloted by Claude Crosby. They were en route from Atlanta to Martinsville, Virginia, on business connected to one of Murphy's investment projects. The weather was poor, with low clouds and fog sweeping across the Blue Ridge Mountains. The plane never arrived. For 2 days, search teams scoured the area. On May 31st, the wreckage was found near Brush Mountain. All 6 people on board were killed instantly. The official report cited pilot error in instrument conditions. It was ruled an accident, and the case was closed within weeks. Murphy's body, badly burned, was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Thousands attended, including generals, actors, and ordinary veterans who had idolized him. The nation mourned its most decorated soldier, but not everyone believed the story ended there. Former military investigator Harold Greeley later claimed that something about the crash didn't add up. The flight's radio transmissions went silent minutes before the descent, and the plane's final trajectory suggested possible interference with its navigation system. "It looked like the instruments went haywire," Greeley said. Another expert noted that the type of equipment aboard the Aero Commander could have been susceptible to jamming. Decades later, declassified documents revealed that the region around Brush Mountain had been used for electronic warfare testing by defense contractors. Whether coincidence or connection, the details kept resurfacing. In the days that followed the crash, the tributes flowed in from all over. Newspapers dubbed Audie Murphy a hero to the end, a humble, courageous man. In Texas, flags flew at half-staff, while radio stations replayed wartime interviews with Audie Murphy speaking softly of duty and sacrifice. Beneath the mourning, though, quiet doubts stirred. Those who knew him best were uneasy with the official story. His widow, Pamela, later told friends that something about the crash never made sense. The flight had been short, the pilot experienced, and the aircraft in solid condition. Murphy himself was cautious about travel, often refusing to fly in poor weather unless absolutely necessary. Audie trusted the ground more than the sky, said longtime friend Bill Weaver. If he got on that plane, he had a reason. That reason, according to some, was a meeting scheduled in Virginia with government contacts tied to his defense research work. The meeting was never officially acknowledged. A year after the crash, in 1972, a retired Army colonel named Raymond Holt started his own private investigation into the matter. Holt had served in Europe with Murphy's division and considered him a brother in arms. He obtained copies of the accident report, interviewed witnesses, and even went to the site where the plane crashed. The debris pattern didn't fit an accidental descent, Holt would later write in an unpublished manuscript. It looked like the engines had failed simultaneously or that power was cut deliberately. His claims were dismissed by officials, but the questions lingered. Donald Parr, an aviation mechanic who examined the wreckage, pointed out scorch marks inconsistent with an ordinary impact fire. It was as if the plane exploded before it hit, he said. Another curious detail cropped up. The aircraft's transponder signal reportedly disappeared from radar 5 minutes before the crash. That is unusual, even in bad weather. The FAA officials called it a communications failure, but for those already suspicious, it deepened the mystery. In the years that followed, fragments of information surfaced, each adding another layer of intrigue. In 1975, a hitherto secret Defense Department memo confirmed that Murphy had met with 2 former intelligence officers regarding veteran affairs and defense contracting ethics shortly before his death. The memo did not disclose the nature of their discussion, but its timing fueled speculation that Murphy's death was connected to what he had uncovered. Journalist Frank Michelson, who had tried to interview Murphy weeks before the crash, publicly stated that the war hero had been working on something that scared powerful people. Rumors ran through Hollywood and military circles alike, some claiming Murphy had compiled documents detailing how certain defense contractors were siphoning funds intended for disabled veterans, while others said he had evidence connecting political figures with secret weapons deals. None of this was ever proven, but those who tried to dig deeper found their queries quietly stonewalled. Doors closed real fast when you mentioned his name and defense money in the same sentence, said investigator Harold Greeley. For decades, Pamela Murphy said nothing to anyone, refusing interviews and guarding her husband's memory with fierce protectiveness. In the 1990s, she spoke briefly to historian William Russo. Audie was about to expose something, she said, and he knew it was dangerous. No proof was offered, just a tired sigh. He was always fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. Maybe that's what got him killed. The conspiracy theories proliferated over time, that the plane had been in some way sabotaged, its instruments tampered with to make sure it never arrived at Martinsville. There were others who thought it was an accident, but one distorted by grief and myth-making. Yet the timing and the circumstances were unsettling. Murphy had survived dozens of missions across Europe, countless ambushes, and several near-death experiences. To die on a routine flight just when he was planning to take on some mighty interest seemed, to many, too coincidental to ignore. In 2001, aviation researcher David Lang secured a complete copy of the National Transportation Safety Board's report. He noticed discrepancies between the field notes and the published summary. Certain pages were missing, Lang said. The engine inspection data, the cockpit instrumentation report, they were referenced but not included. Requests for clarification went unanswered. When Lang pressed further, he was informed that the remaining materials had been misplaced during archiving. Over the years, interest in Murphy's death faded from mainstream consciousness, superseded by nostalgia for both his films and his war exploits. Yet among the veterans, whispers endured. They spoke of a man who stood against corruption, who refused to stay quiet even when threatened. Audie was never afraid of a fight, said Sergeant Tom Lawton, a fellow soldier from the 3rd Infantry Division. If they warned him off something, he'd double down. That's who he was. Despite the controversy, Murphy's legacy remained untarnished in the eyes of the public. His grave at Arlington became one of the most visited in the cemetery, second only to John F. Kennedy's. Visitors left medals, letters, and small American flags at his headstone. Many veterans saw him as a symbol of integrity in a world that had grown cynical. To them, his courage extended beyond the battlefield. He had dared to question the powerful even when it cost him everything. Renewed investigations began to surface again in the early 2000s. Documentaries and military historians revisited the story, comparing government archives with eyewitness accounts. Some pointed to the larger pattern of mysterious aviation deaths, involving public figures connected to defense matters during the Cold War era. Others cautiously warned that the legend had outgrown the evidence. Yet even skeptics acknowledged that the unanswered questions were too numerous to be discounted. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between, a genuine accident compounded by secrecy and the paranoia of the times. Or perhaps, as Colonel Stevenson once said, Audie Murphy didn't die because of bad weather. He died because he wouldn't stay silent. What one cannot doubt is that Audie Murphy left an indelible mark on his country. From the dusty fields of Texas to the battle-scarred villages of Europe, from the bright lights of Hollywood to the foggy slopes of Virginia, his life traced the full arc of an American century: glory, struggle, and sacrifice. He was a man shaped by war, broken by fame, and possibly undone by his own relentless honesty. Even now, more than 50 years later, his story still haunts the conscience of a nation that once called him its bravest son. And in the end, perhaps the greatest mystery of all is not how Audie Murphy died, but how he lived fiercely, fearlessly, and without compromise, even when the cost was everything.